The day my brother handed me a summons, he was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one, the kind of smile that says, "I've already won and you don't know it yet." I stood in the doorway of my apartment, holding a yellow envelope, still in my pajamas, coffee going cold on the counter behind me. He'd driven 2 hours to deliver it personally. That should have told me everything. I read the first page 3 times before the words stopped swimming. Plaintiff Gregory and Paulette Morrow. Defendant Sloane Morrow. My parents were suing me for the house. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning is the kind of story that sounds made up until you realize how ordinary it actually is. My grandfather built that house in 1971. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. He and my grandmother raised 3 kids there, including my mother. When my grandmother passed, my grandfather stayed alone for 11 years, fixing the gutters himself, until he couldn't, mowing the lawn, until his knees gave out, refusing every conversation about moving closer to family. He finally agreed when I was 22. I'd just graduated with a finance degree, just taken a junior analyst position that paid almost nothing, and was living in a studio apartment where the radiator knocked all winter. My grandfather called me one Sunday evening and said, "Sloane, I want you to have the house." Not my parents, not my brother, me. I was his youngest grandchild and the only one who'd driven out to visit him every few months when everyone else got busy. I'm not saying that to make myself sound noble. It was just true. We'd sit on that porch and he'd tell me about my grandmother, about the neighborhood when it was young, about what it felt like to build something from nothing. I think he just wanted someone to keep it. He deeded it to me the following spring. Simple as that. Keen title transfer, no strings. Fully notarized. My parents were there. They signed as witnesses. My mother hugged him and said she was glad it was staying in the family. The house needed work. The kitchen hadn't been updated since 1994. One of the bathrooms had a slow leak that had gone ignored too long. The HVAC system was original and running on borrowed time. Over the next 3 years, I poured money into it. I refinanced my car to cover the HVAC. I put a new roof on in year 2, $14,200, paid out of pocket because my homeowner's insurance deductible was higher than the damage assessment. I kept every receipt. Not because I expected anything, because that's how my grandfather taught me to do things. I wasn't even living there full time yet. I was renting it out, managing it from Columbus, covering the property taxes myself, which in Franklin County were running close to $4,800 a year by then. My brother, for the record, lived 40 minutes away and came to help exactly once. He mowed the lawn in September the year after I got it. I thanked him genuinely. That was the extent of his involvement. Then my parents retired. My father was 64, my mother 62. They'd sold their own house in a downsizing move that went sideways. They'd bought a condo that turned out to have serious HOA issues, got out of it at a loss, and suddenly found themselves without a permanent home and with less retirement savings than they'd planned. My mother called me in February 2 years after the deed transfer. "We were thinking," she said, "about the house." I told her she could move in. Of course, it was family. My tenant's lease was up in April anyway. I had them move in May 1st. What I did not do was transfer the deed. Looking back, I know why. It wasn't calculation at the time, or not entirely. It was just instinct. The house was mine. My grandfather had chosen to give it to me, and I'd watched my parents manage money long enough to know that their retirement situation wasn't stable. I loved them, but love and legal ownership are 2 different things. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd figure something out long term, that having them there was the right thing to do. For a while it was fine. Then it wasn't. The first sign was small. My mother mentioned casually that she'd redecorated the back bedroom. I said that was fine. A few months later, she told me she'd given a key to my aunt because she wanted to feel like she could have family over freely. I said that was fine too, a little less enthusiastically. Then my father told me he'd talked to a contractor about converting the garage into a proper workshop space. Nothing major, just some electrical work. I asked him to hold off until we talked. He did not hold off. When I drove out to visit that July, there was a 220-volt circuit running to a workbench my father had built against the back wall of the garage. It was actually well done. That almost made it worse. You should have asked me, I said. It's my home, he said. Not our house. Not your house, but I live here. His home. I let it pass. I shouldn't have. Over the next year, the dynamics shifted in ways that were hard to name in real time but obvious in hindsight. My parents started referring to the property as the family home in conversations with relatives. My mother told my cousin that she and my father had moved back to the house, the implication being that it had always been theirs, that my name on the deed was some kind of administrative arrangement. When I raised the property taxes coming due in November, my father said he thought I was handling it. I was handling it. I had been. But I wanted them to contribute something. I wasn't asking for rent. I was asking them to pay the utility bills, at minimum. We're your parents, my mother said, as if that answered it. I paid the taxes. I paid the utilities. I kept my mouth shut at Thanksgiving because my brother was there, and the last thing I wanted was to make it a whole thing. My brother, for the record, had started spending a lot of time at the house. His own apartment lease had ended and he was between places. He'd been between places for about 8 months. By the time the following spring came around, I had spent, I know the number because I added it up when the lawsuit was filed, $31,400 on that property beyond my initial purchase year. Taxes, repairs, the roof, the annual maintenance. Every dollar documented. The lawsuit came in March. My parents, represented by an attorney named, and I will never forget this, a very confident man who clearly had not read the full file, claimed that the deed transfer had been executed under undue influence, that my grandfather had been mentally diminished at the time of signing, that as his primary heirs, they were entitled to the property. My brother had found the attorney. I found that out later. I sat in my car in the parking garage after I left the courthouse for the initial filing review and I cried for about 15 minutes. Not because I was scared of losing, I was scared of what it meant that we had arrived here, that my parents had hired a lawyer, that my brother had helped them do it, that the house my grandfather had given me, chosen to give me, was now the subject of a legal dispute, in which my family was painting me as someone who had manipulated an old man. My grandfather had been sharp until the last year of his life. He'd done his own taxes until he was 79. I called my own attorney the next morning. I want to be clear about something. My attorney, Deborah, is not flashy. She doesn't do dramatic courtroom speeches. What she does is read every single document in front of her 3 times before she says anything. She is methodical in a way that makes some people impatient. I've never been so grateful for anything in my life. She called me 4 days after I retained her. I've read through the deed, she said, and I've read through the complaint. I need to ask you something. Have you read the original deed document in full? Not the summary, the full recorded document. I said I had a copy, but I'd mostly focused on the title and the signature page. Read page 4, she said. Paragraph 7. Call me after. I found the document in my email archives, opened it on my laptop at the kitchen table, and read paragraph 7 of page 4. It took me 3 readings to understand what I was looking at. My grandfather, who had built that house, owned it for 53 years and knew exactly what he was doing, had included a deed covenant. It was a real property restriction, recorded with the county, attached to the title. It was not unusual language for properties in that area with certain older titles, but it had some very specific provisions that had been customized. The covenant required the titled owner to maintain the property at or above a defined standard. It included a provision about the property being used as a single-family residence. And here's the part, It included a recorded maintenance and tax obligation that traveled with the title, meaning whoever owned the property was legally bound to fulfill those obligations. They didn't disappear when the deed transferred, they transferred with it. My grandfather had been paying into a small property maintenance escrow for decades, a relic of a community agreement from the 1970s, and that obligation, a few $100s annually, was still attached. None of that was the important part. The important part was a single sentence in paragraph 7 that neither my parents' attorney nor, apparently, my parents themselves had read carefully. I won't quote it exactly, but it said in plain language that any transfer of the property back to a direct lineal ancestor of the original grantor would trigger a full reassessment of all recorded financial obligations against the property, including any deferred maintenance liens and unpaid assessments. There were 2 of those, small amounts individually. Together, plus interest over the years since they'd first been recorded, they came to just over $22,000. Deborah explained it carefully. If they win this case, she said, they take title to a property with $22,000 in encumbrances that immediately come due upon transfer. Plus, they assume all ongoing tax obligations, maintenance covenanters, and the escrow contribution. Their attorney doesn't appear to have done a title search beyond the basic ownership chain. I asked her what she recommended. She was quiet for a moment. What do you want? She asked. And that was the question, wasn't it? I thought about my grandfather on that porch. I thought about the way he'd handed me the deed folder and said, I want it to go to someone who'll take care of it. I thought about my mother's voice when she said it's the family home, the casual certainty of it. I thought about my brother's smile when he handed me the summons. I want this to be over, I said. I want them to understand what they're actually asking for. Deborah nodded. I could somehow hear it through the phone. Then I know exactly what to do. She filed our response 2 weeks before the hearing date. It was thorough. She documented the full title history, my grandfather's mental competency records, his physician's notes from that period, his tax returns filed in his own hand, 2 letters he'd written in the months before and after the deed transfer that were articulate and sharp. She documented my expenses, all $31,400 of them itemized. And she attached a full title search, including the recorded covenant and the outstanding assessments. Their attorney had filed a confident motion. By the time the hearing arrived, something had changed. I noticed it in the way he moved through the room. He kept his eyes down. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom. My mother was wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her for her birthday 3 years ago. I don't know why I noticed that. I noticed it. The judge reviewed the materials. She asked both attorneys several questions. At one point, she asked my parents' attorney whether he had conducted a full title review prior to filing. He said something I couldn't hear from where I was sitting. The judge looked at him for a long moment. She did not rule from the bench that day. She took it under advisement and set a follow-up for 3 weeks out. In the hallway afterward, my parents' attorney pulled my parents aside. I was too far away to hear. I saw my mother's expression change. I saw my father look at the floor. 2 weeks later, Deborah called to tell me they were withdrawing the suit. No explanation was offered in the legal documents. They just withdrew. I sat with that for a long time. My father called me 3 days after the withdrawal notice. He didn't apologize, not directly. He said we should have had a conversation first. I told him I agreed. There was a long silence. He said the attorney had explained the deed situation to them after the hearing. I told him I knew. The house needs the gutters cleaned, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. I'll come out next weekend and do it. He said that would be good. My mother and I had a harder conversation 2 months later, sitting at the kitchen table of a house that was still legally mine. She told me she'd felt invisible in it, that living there without it being hers had felt like charity. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. I told her I should have found a way to talk about it sooner, to figure out something formal, something that gave her a real stake, instead of just letting the situation drift. "But I'm not transferring the deed," I said, "not because I was punishing anyone, because the house was my grandfather's last decision and he'd made it deliberately, and I wasn't going to undo it in the middle of a conflict." She nodded slowly. "My brother has not called me since the withdrawal. That part still sits in my chest like a stone I can't move. He drove 2 hours to hand me that summons with a smile on his face. I don't know yet what to do with that, or if there's anything to do. Maybe some things take longer than a year to sort through. Maybe some things don't sort all the way. The gutters are clean now. My parents are still in the house. We had Thanksgiving together, carefully, all of us doing the work of being in the same room without it becoming anything. My mother made the sweet potato casserole the way she always has, with the brown sugar crust, and I ate 2 servings, and for a few minutes it felt almost normal. The house was appraised last fall at $340,000. The outstanding assessments have been paid. I paid them because they were my obligation as title holder and because getting ahead of them was the right financial move. I've spoken with an estate attorney about a formal arrangement for my parents' continued occupancy, a life estate option, possibly something that gives them genuine legal standing without removing my grandfather's choice. It's not a clean ending. It's not the kind of story that finishes neatly. But I sat on that porch in October, the same one my grandfather sat on for 30 years, and I watched the leaves come down from the oak tree he planted in 1974, and I thought about what he'd said when he handed me the deed. Someone who'll take care of it. I'm trying to. All of it. The house, the family, the mess of loving people who hurt you. I don't always know how, but I'm still trying. That, I think, is what he meant. I keep coming back to the moment my brother handed me that envelope. The smile. The 2-hour drive he made just to be there when I opened it. I've thought about what that took. Not courage, but something colder than courage, and I still don't have a clean word for it. What I do know is this. The way things ended wasn't luck. It wasn't fate handing me a win out of nowhere. My grandfather made a careful decision when he was sharp enough to make it, documented it properly, and included language in that deed that protected exactly what he intended to protect. He didn't do that by accident. He did it because he understood that love inside a family doesn't always hold, and that if you want something to last, you have to build it on something sturdier than good intentions. That's the part I sit with now. He knew. Maybe not that this specific fight would happen, but that property and family and money have a way of pulling people toward their worst selves. He did what a clear-minded person does. He thought it through, wrote it down, and made sure the paperwork said what he meant. I didn't fully appreciate that until I was sitting at my kitchen table reading paragraph 7 of page 4 of a document I'd owned for 3 years and never fully read. That was on me. And it's a lesson I won't forget, not just about deeds and legal language, but about the kind of attention that responsible ownership actually requires. You can't just hold something and assume holding is enough. You have to understand what you're holding it. The other thing I've had to reckon with is this. I spent 3 years absorbing costs quietly, telling myself it was the right thing to do, and never once having a direct conversation with my parents about what our arrangement actually was. I was so afraid of making it awkward that I let it become something much worse. There's a version of this story where I have one honest conversation in year 1 about contributions, about expectations, about what living in someone else's property actually means, and none of the rest of it happens. I'll never know for sure. But I know avoidance isn't kindness. It just delays the damage and lets it compound. What kept me standing through all of it wasn't anger. Anger burned off fast. What stayed was something quieter. The knowledge that I had done the work, kept the records, paid the taxes, fixed the roof, shown up. Not perfectly, but consistently. There's a kind of steadiness that comes from being able to look at a spreadsheet of your own actions and say, I did what I said I would do. That doesn't make you righteous. But it gives you somewhere to stand when someone tries to tell a different version of the story. My grandfather sat on that porch for 30 years. He built something and he tended it, and then he made a choice about who should carry it forward. I think about that when the weight of it gets heavy. The maintenance, the family tension, the things still unresolved with my brother. He didn't give me the house because it was easy. He gave it to me because he thought I could handle the hard parts. I'm still figuring out if he was right.